Hi, everyone. I'm hoping you're having a wonderful week. So, this week we're going to cover a topic that's near and dear to my heart. When I presented FJ Lab's investment thesis in one of the earlier episodes, I explained how we love investing aligned with our vision of the future of work. And for us, it's a world where people do only the job they love, and basically everything else is done for them. And in fact, the company we had last week, Slice, is an example of that. It helps the Luigi's of the world, just cook pizza and interact with their customers and takes care of all the back office because they didn't sign up in life as small entrepreneurs to do all the back office and accounting, administrative. This is not why they became entrepreneurs. And when you read books on the topic of the future of jobs or the future of work, most of them are actually extraordinarily dire and negative. It's like, oh, automation will destroy all jobs. We'll have huge unemployment. It's going to be the end of the world. And I came across an author, Jeff Wald, who's also a fellow entrepreneur. He wrote a book called The End of Jobs, who actually has a very fundamentally different perspective. And the end of jobs, in a way, is a bit of a misnomer because most people think, oh, it means there's no more work in the future. But what it really means is the end of jobs as we know them today, because jobs as we know them today are actually a recent invention. And so it'll be actually interesting to hear his perspective on like, what is the future of work? Is this dire forecast most people have really in the works? And what will most people be like and work like in the future? So without any further ado, let's get going. Welcome to episode 26, Jeff Wald and the End of Jobs. So Jeff, thank you for joining us today.
Great to see you again, Fabrice. Great to be here.
So, how did you get going down this journey? Maybe talk about your entrepreneurial journey and how it basically you into becoming an author, which is not necessarily obvious. Most entrepreneurs don't then decide to go and write books.
I think those of us that have written books, we tend to do it after we've had an exit and therefore have some time. And so it was the purchase of my company by ADP that gave me the space to finally finish this book. Fabrice, I started writing it because I would go as the founder of Work Market, which is the leading platform for companies to manage on-demand labor. I would go to these conferences and I would give talks or be on panels. And the number of people that would spout just ridiculousness was very frustrating to me. I'm very driven by data and evidence, and the things that I say are backed up by evidence. And so when I'd hear people just spout ridiculousness, I would get very frustrated and challenge them. And I thought, you know what? We need a different framework for thinking about the future of work. And what I try to set out in the book is let's look at the history of work. Let's look at the data and the data sets over time, and let's look at how companies actually engage workers. And if we're looking through those lenses, we have a higher probability of being correct about the future of work.
And so, what were the typical nonsense things that were being spouted, and what's basically a summary of each of these different lenses that you want to take that you can take us through?
Well, the first ridiculousness was that 50% of the workforce is going to be on-demand labor by 2020. And when I founded Work Market, that was a great statistic, right? We were helping to push that transformation, but that statistic never had a chance of coming true. Because when you look at history, when you look at the data trends, and when you think about how companies actually engage workers, they're not going to suddenly shift all their workforce to on-demand labor. It's not going to happen. And so what was funny to me is that people made this prediction from 2010, 2011, 12, 13. And then as you get into 18 and 19, you stopped hearing it. And then as you get into 20, and the on-demand labor force had grown maybe 3% over that period of time, you started hearing people saying, oh, well, by 2030, and that's the new prediction now, 2030, the world of work, 50% will be on-demand labor. Wasn't true in 2010 about 2020. It is definitively not true in 2021 about 2030. And we can talk for hours about why that is. But the other thing that I find very frustrating is something you highlighted right at the beginning, which is a lot of people going, oh my God, all the jobs are going to go. We have this new technological change. And this is where we can kind of jump into our first lesson from history, which is we've been here before. We've had what we call industrial revolutions. these huge step functions of technological change that fundamentally alter that supply and demand balance between workers because a new technology comes on stream that massively increases productivity and drives even more power to companies. And companies, workers, and societies have to adapt. And there are always people in that adaptation phase that say, oh my God, all the jobs are going to go. And they are always wrong. Always. And so I have no reason to believe they're going to be correct this time. And the data certainly is starting to tell us that they will not be correct.
Yeah, the example I typically give is let's go back. Let's compare a 20-year time cycle. Let's go back. Let's compare 1999 to 2019. I mean, 2019, 2020 is a bit of an outlier because of COVID. And so in 1999, if I go to people there and I tell them, in 2019, the top four job categories will have been decimated. We want to have nearly as many bank tellers. You want to have nearly, and by the way, even that statistic, as you point out in the book, is not quite true. You want to have travel agents. 500 billion of commerce will have gone from retail, local, will have gone online, and all of car manufacturing will have been automated. Please now describe the economic conditions and the unemployment in 2019. And people would tell you, oh my God, the Great Depression, 25% unemployment rate. Whereas in fact, we had the lowest unemployment we'd had in like 50 years, full employment. And, where do you think that stems from? That the fact that people have that fear.
Well, there was a great quote in The Economist, and The Economist and the World Economic Forum, I think, are two of the most sober views on the future of work. And they had this great quote, which is that we tend to romanticize how work used to be. We tend to complain about how work is, and we tend to be very fearful about how work is going to become, even though there are three almost uninterrupted trends in the world of work, almost uninterrupted for over 200 years. Every single year, we create more jobs, people work fewer hours, and they have a higher standard of living. Almost uninterrupted. But that doesn't change the way humans react. And they see something and say, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? And it's the fear of the unknown. And so when you think about these industrial revolutions, when you break them down, they generally go through three phases. And that first phase is always the freak out phase, where people say, oh my God, all the jobs are going to go. I don't know what the future holds and society is going to crumble. And then you move into the phase that people really should be concerned about, which is the phase of economic and social dislocation, because there are a lot of jobs lost and there are a lot of communities that really get hurt. There are a lot of job functions, to your point, that go away. But then we move into that final phase of adaptation where you see more jobs being created, higher standards of living, people working fewer hours. And what concerns me is that people overreact to the false fear of, oh my God, all the jobs are going to go. And they don't react appropriately as individuals, as companies, as societies to the very real challenge of that economic and social dislocation for the 10 to 15% of jobs that do go and the workers that we need to retrain to move into the jobs that are going to grow. That is the big challenge in this fourth industrial revolution.
Yeah. What's interesting to me is I think maybe it also stems from the fact that it's easy to imagine the jobs that are going to disappear. They're like, oh, self-driving trucks are going to disappear. Trucking jobs. It's much harder to imagine the jobs that are going to be created, right? Like, so if you're in
Very true.
1999 again, you don't imagine jobs like Twitchcaster and or streamer or YouTube content creator and all those things that didn't even exist. And in fact, if you probably describe the job of like social media influencer or manager to someone, they probably laugh at you. They're like, that's not a job. And yet
You're 100% correct. I always say in this, my standard talk, I'll always say, if you said to somebody in 1999, how many people do you think would be employed as a social media manager? They would say to you, what the hell is that? And I would say, well, it's a job in which hundreds of thousands of people are employed in 20 years. They would be like, I can't even imagine what that
yeah.
is. And here we are.
The other thing that I think is really interesting is most of the jobs that are being destroyed, in a way, I actually am happy they're being destroyed. They're like jobs that are better done by computers. They're better done by robots, right? Like they're dehumanizing. Like humans are not meant to be like, taking a bolt and like just bolting it over and over again, and that's your task. I mean, I thought that Taylorism and Fordism, while perhaps allowing us in the early days before machinery could take it over, have economies of scale, really was dehumanizing the workers. And if I think of like what are humans good at, like things like emotional intelligence and empathy, we're not there to be flipping burgers. So the fact that these jobs are being destroyed, I think ultimately it's not a bad thing.
The jobs that do get destroyed historically are what we would say are jobs that are comprised of repetitive high volume tasks. That is where you see automation take jobs. And so we saw it, to your point, in industrial manufacturing, and that repetitive high volume job of turning the bolts, putting this on, putting that on, it gets automated. You are now seeing it in data entry and other administrative tasks because they're doing the same thing over and over again. And if you're in a job that nearly 100% of the component tasks of that job are repetitive high volume tasks, that job is at tremendous risk. But the important word here is risk. It doesn't mean historically that it goes away. There are so many variables that go into whether a job is created or destroyed. You can look at the repetitive high volume tasks in being a waiter or a waitress. Clearly, it is not 100% of those tasks, but it is a very large component of those tasks, the same things over and over, table by table, customer by customer. The technology has existed to displace that for some time. I don't need a waiter or waitress to hand me a menu. I could have it on a tablet and I could just click, I want this, 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 and this. And I could say, no, I'll ketchup on the side. What wine goes with that? And AI could tell me what wine pairs with it. Great, I'll have that. But we don't want that experience as humans. So just because we have these repetitive high volume tasks as a high percentage of the task doesn't mean the job goes away. And that's an important point around the complexity that goes into labor resource planning.
So, taking a step back and maybe walking through the architecture of the book, if you're happy to talk about it, I think phase one is like the history of jobs, and it's actually interesting to me because most of us think of like jobs as they exist today as something we take for granted that's existed forever. But frankly, as you point out, I think until like frankly 200 years ago, most
Yep.
humans were farmers in the field, working day and night. Our job was like trying to survive, and jobs as they exist didn't really exist. I mean,
It's very true. This is a very new notion. You can think of people prior to that having a lot of their own agency. Look, in some cases, obviously, no agency, there were serfs and all kinds of terrible things. But as a farmer, you are an entrepreneur.
yeah,
As a blacksmith, as a tradesperson, you're an entrepreneur. That's in our DNA as humanity when you stretch back thousands and thousands of years. This notion of I'm going to go to a centralized location to work for somebody else, that is very, very new in the human experience. And it is something that is unwinding now as we move towards a more entrepreneurial, creator economy and a host of other things. But it will unwind slowly and it will only unwind for some sectors of the economy. It is not this huge change that's suddenly going to wipe away jobs. The 9 to 5, one boss, one manager job is going to end. And that is the point of the title of the book. But that doesn't mean that we're all going to be creators, right? There's
of
always
course.
that balance and a very slow movement.
The It's actually funny that the definition of job that came right before the current definition was basically a bank robbery, or a robbery in general, which I thought was amusing. But it's interesting because, to your point, we were all entrepreneurs, and we're kind of all, in a way, or many are becoming again entrepreneurs again with this new on-demand economy of sorts. And I think the vision as you articulated, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, is not that it's going to be on-demand jobs per se, but companies are becoming more agile, and the tool that, and you might be selling your services to multiple people, etc. I mean, what is actually your vision of the future of jobs? What do you think of work? What does it look like 20 years from now? And has COVID changed that perspective?
So So COVID has sped up a number of things, but and here's I hope a point that I'm emphasizing to your listeners here is that we need to look at the data. And with COVID, to your point about 2020 being such an anomalous year, it's anomalous and 2021 isn't much better. We've had huge movements of curves. We need everything to steady out. There's a fundamental question right now in the office worker category of will people come back to the office 2 days a week or three? That's a seemingly simple question, right? The difference between 2 and 3 days is tremendous. 2 days, and I'm a remote worker. I have a different tax complexion. I have a different commuting complexion. I have a different infrastructure in the office complexion because at 2 days a week, I'm a hot desker or a hotel desker. 3 days a week, now I'm more than 50% of the time, I have tax nexus in that location. And that location is probably going to provide more infrastructure to me, like my own desk. The difference between that 2 and 3 days and where we settle is huge for office space, for commuting patterns, traffic patterns, for central business districts. And we don't even know where we're going to settle there. So we need to be very mindful of where this data is going to play out as we, God willing, in the very near term, return to normal. So that is kind of the first thing is we just don't know a lot. That said, the broad patterns we can definitely gain comfort and high probability in 2040, kind of the 20-year outlook. A lot of the jobs requiring repetitive high volume processes will be automated. We'll have 10 to 15% of job loss in the United States, and in the United States being a very good proxy for the rest of the OECD or developed countries around the world. And we will have more jobs in total in the economy where we have a higher standard of living. We'll have people working fewer hours. Those are trends we can gain a lot of comfort in because of history. We can gain comfort that the on-demand economy has continued to grow, ultimately 28% of the labor force today to probably somewhere in the low 30s. We can gain comfort that the remote workforce will go from 3% post-pandemic to somewhere in the 8% range post-pandemic and going to the future. But importantly, the flexible part of the workforce will go from somewhere around 8% pre-pandemic to about 33% of the labor force. Those are things that we have a lot of comfort in, but it's important to note labor statistics historically move very slowly, very methodically, are often driven by technological change. So we're in that period now, but more importantly, they're driven by demographics. And so the biggest question for me when I think about the labor force in 20 years are what are the birth rates in the United States? What are the immigration policies in the United States? And what do those look like? Because that will define what size of labor force and componentry of labor force we have.
Well, I mean, by the way, it's not statistically significant, but what we're doing is we have a maybe half of the office is coming in 3 days a week or more, and so they have permanent desks, and half that are on a hot desk policy. So it's a kind of a hybrid where we're partially clean desk policy and hot desk, and partially dedicated desks. But the majority of the desks are on the hot desk system.
That hybrid workforce will be the kind of word of choice over the next 2 years.
Yeah.
So people are going to say, oh, we have some people doing this, some people doing that. And that is the right approach, right? This whole notion of painting everything with a broad brush and, oh, this technology means we need to change. Maybe, but what does it mean for your industry? What does it mean for your company? What does it mean for people in different job functions? And that becomes an important thing to study and understand, not just say, oh, well, this is happening, therefore we have to do that. That's a terrible way to do any kind of planning.
Charles, one of your viewers asking, will people continue to be in companies for the long term, or will everyone or more people move to gig style?
So look here, let's start with some data, Charles, right? First, let's start with the data that the on-demand economy, the gig economy, so this is freelancers and temps, just to be very clear about our definitions. It was somewhere around 25% of the labor force about 10 years ago, and it had been around that level for 30, 40 years, very long time. Over that 10-year period, as we saw VMS and FMS technology, the ability to manage that part of your workforce grow. Over that period of time, as we saw more companies try to be more agile, we saw a 3% share shift, meaning the on-demand labor market took share from the full-time labor market. Now, look, that's a pretty big shift, but that's 0.3% a year, not the, oh my God, it's going to get to 50% in the next 10 years. Not even close. I would say we've played a lot of those trends out in corporate America. I think a lot of work streams that could go on demand have, and I think you're not going to see that much more movement, but you'll see continued slow and steady movement. Maybe instead of 0.3 a year, we'll see 0.15 to 0.2, like still growth, still growth.
Maybe there's another
The,
implied question there, which is
please.
the tenure of people in normal jobs, so not the gig jobs, but it seems to be declining. People seem to be getting more and more jobs over time. Is that a long-term trend? Do you think that's going to continue?
It is a long-term trend. So, But again, the historic context here is super important. The Bureau of Labor Statistics started tracking in 1960 what is the average amount of time a person spends in a job. And in 1960, it was 5 years. People have this notion that in 1960, the height of the lifetime employment model, that people stayed at companies for 30, 40 years. Did some people do it for reason? Of course. Did some companies have the defined benefit pension plan and all of those things? Of course they did. But to pretend that that was the reality for most workers in the United States of America, there's just no data to back up that point of view because the average worker was more mobile than we thought. Again, we tend to romanticize the past, right? Oh, it used to be so much better. No, it really wasn't. But that said, that five has shrunk to four. That doesn't seem like a lot over a 60-year time period, but that's it's a very big reduction and it has a lot of implications. So are people more mobile now? Definitively. But is that a sea change from where we were? No, it is a slow and steady change as labor statistics do.
That's the reason it feels like a lot. Perhaps I'm speculating here. Is if you're working for 5 years at a time over a 40-year work period, I don't know how long people work for on average. That's much fewer jobs over a 4 year time period because 40 divided by 4 is just 10. So you have 10 jobs in one case, you have 8 jobs in the other case.
Yes, it is true. Look, people are moving more often. There's no question, but it's just not as drastic a change as people like to pretend.
So you and I think, fall in the rational, data driven, fact based camp in general in life. And we probably apply this type of lens for most things. That said, if you look at psychology, convincing people with facts is rarely extremely effective. So how do you like tug on the emotional heartstrings, and like how do you make them connect in a way that you can actually change their mind? Because historically, trying to convince people with facts, that hasn't seemed particularly effective. Maybe it's good if you're a leader, and maybe leaders are going to be more receptive or open-minded to changing their mind or thinking through what the future looks holds. But for most people, I don't know. I found that it's hard to argue with facts.
Look, it is one of the many things I lament about our society is the continued movement towards non-facts and simple answers. And certainly we've had some leaders politically in this country that were very loose with facts and very quick to just say whatever it is they felt. And I think that it was so dangerous for society on so many levels. I hope that we are starting to get back to some fact-based decisions, but certainly psychologically, you're correct, right? People respond to anecdotes. They respond to powerful stories and visions, of images of people suffering. They respond to that, right? There's nothing more powerful than seeing, that great picture, not great in, not in the exciting term of the Great Depression and that family in the Dust Bowl of I believe it was Oklahoma. That image is seared in our minds. That image is more powerful. The images of bread lines are more powerful. And those are the images that get laid over stories about how technology may impact our lives. It's very difficult, to your point earlier, to put forward that image of, hey, everything's just going to be great because that's where life is. I think it is one of those things that we just have to continue to press on facts, continue to see and know how the world is going to play out. It's one thing to drive the narrative in the public markets. It's another, to your point, to have these conversations thoughtfully with leaders at companies to say, look, you need to be mindful of history, data, and how companies engage workers, and let's react thoughtfully about how we should think about labor force transformation.
And is that the audience for your book? It's basically leaders who need to think through what the future holds for them so they can prepare and adapt.
So the short answer is, everybody, the audience for the book is everybody that wants to think about the future of work, but I hope that it influences those that are really in the positions to think about how they want to transform their labor forces. And those might be company leaders, or it might be union leaders, it might be policymakers, it might be individual managers thinking about their teams, or it really is anybody thinking about, well, where am I best positioning myself and my family for the future of work?
You, the way you conclude the book is a kind of I don't know if it's intriguing. It's definitely different, right? Like you're inviting global thinkers, leaders to like write their vision of what work looks like in 2040. Um,
Mhm.
did you agree with all of their visions? The anything insightful or interesting or different or unexpected that came out of it, or maybe unexpected because of who said it relative to what they said?
I will say this, writing a book is really, really, really difficult. And the idea of using a little Tom Sawyer method here of getting some other people to write about half of it was, I would love to say it was my stroke of genius, but it was not. It was a friend of mine who said, "Oh, why don't you get some of these people that you've interviewed for the book to write their vision of the world of work in 2040?" I was like, well, that is just a really good idea. I'm going to do that immediately. And so was I. Look, I love each one of their pieces. I think they were incredibly thoughtful. I love the ways in which they wrote them. Some people wrote letters to their grandkids. Some people wrote them as short stories, imagining the life of a person in 2040. Some people were very optimistic about the world of work is going. Some were very pessimistic. So I think the one that has the least chance of coming true, I hope, was the one by our friend Andy Stern. For those that don't know who Andy is, Andy ran the largest labor union in the United States, the Service Employees International Union. And he's got a very dystopian view of the world that is driven obviously by his worldview of companies taking advantage of workers at every point that they can. And I just don't believe that that is what's going to happen. And I not only don't believe it, I obviously hope very much that that's not what happens.
I,
But that is the one that was probably not surprising, giving Andy's worldview.
I think people end up being colored by the job they do. Someone told me one of their friends was a police investigator who was looking into minor abduction, and so of course his entire world was this is what happens in the world, and so super conservative, overprotective of his children because from his perspective those were commonplace. If you took a step back and you look at the data and it's like 1 in a million or whatever it is, it's actually extraordinarily rare. But if it is the life you live in on a day in, day out basis, you're like, wow, the world is a dangerous, scary place. And I think if you've been a union leader over the last 40 years, I'm sure that your perspective is skewed or by that.
You're 100% correct. Look, just last night, I was on a date last night and I said, "Oh, let's walk this way." She said, "Oh, we can't walk through Times Square. We'll get shot." I was like, "Are you referring to the fact that a person was shot there like 2 months ago?" She's like, "Yeah, did you read that story?" I was like, "But I mean, statistic, like, but to our point earlier, right? That was the narrative. That was the story she heard. The data on the fact that that is an incredibly, incredibly, incredibly rare occurrence was irrelevant. It was the story of something that happened a little bit ago was so ingrained in her mind that she couldn't imagine walking through Times Square. So we took the long way around.
Perhaps better for
Is
the
what it
date
was.
anyway. Though that might be
Yeah.
a signal of lack of compatibility otherwise. Anything we
Yeah, I think it was reason number 72 on that date that we should not have been on a date at all and there will be no second date. But be that as it may. I hope she's not watching this because I haven't told her there'll be no second date, but I
I doubt
think
it.
we're gonna be okay.
My audience is mostly entrepreneurs and aspiring entrepreneurs and VCs. Um,
Uh,
anything we didn't cover about the book or that should be said?
Look, I want to make sure that people think about a few things. One, all of which I think we've touched on, but I'll just summarize, right? One is you need to be thoughtful, look at data, look at evidence, look at history, because history, obviously tends to rhyme. You need to not paint everything with a broad brush. You need to think about your industry, your company, the functions that you have, and you need to be wary of simple answers because people have this statement of, oh, this new tech exists, therefore this job's going to go. And that it almost is never the case. And so just be mindful, be thoughtful, and be introspective and use the evidence available to you. And I think you'll be able to craft your own vision of what the world of work may look like.
Do you read No Opinion?
I
NOAH
do not.
opinion. No, it's a
No.
blog on written by an economist on basically his case of optimism for the future, and it's very thoughtful and well articulated, and actually pretty nuanced of like things that are going well, things that are not going well, and like answering and very detailed. So what's next for you?
I will.
Are you a writer now? Are you gonna go back and be a tech entrepreneur? Is it gonna be in in the labor in the work related space, or
Well, look, I am going to focus, per your thesis, on doing the jobs that I love. And one of the jobs that I love is being an entrepreneur. So I think I've got one more ride in me. I think I've got one more company. And so I love the team at ADP and love my time there. But my lockup period ended a couple months ago. So I am now writing out a non-compete, which is such a gift to be able to do. And I always recognize how fortunate I am to be able to sit and ideate on my next business plan. And so right now I'm in business plan writing mode, which will take me probably another 6 months. And then it will coincide with the end of my non-compete, and I will jump back into the world of work.
business plan? You write a business plan post you have an idea, so I guess you already have an idea, or it's your
Well, I've got
process for
four
coming
different
up with
business
an idea.
plans. So I will tell you this, even when I was running Work Market, I had some business plans going,
Okay.
right? It's one of those outlets that, I'm going this way and I'm going this way and going this way. And every now and again, I like to turn and just
Yeah.
work on something different, have that context shift. And then I have a different mindset when I come back to the main problem at hand, which was building and scaling Work Market. So right now I've got four business plans, and what I do for Reese is I'm just always in that process of writing them. They're in various stages of development, and I'm always in the process of sharing those business plans with people that know more than I do or have a different perspective than I do on that problem, and I want them challenging it. And in doing that, two things are going to happen for me. Again, over months and hundreds of conversations, two important things are going to happen. One is I'm going to start getting a better sense of the probability of success. And as you know better than almost anybody, the probability of success in our world is very low to begin
Absolutely.
with. And so if I feel like I can get it up to like the 20s, maybe, that's mind blowing to me. That's number one. Number two is I'm going to see in defending the idea, in iterating on the idea, how passionate I am about it. And if those two things start to align, a high probability of success, and I'm still jazzed about it, that's where we're going to go in early 22.
That process is actually not too dissimilar to what we do at FJ Labs. Twice a year, even though we all have day jobs, either as EIRs, of running a company, or investing, or whatever, we all come together and we need to pitch ideas. What doesn't exist in the world that should exist? And we come up with 100 ideas a pop, which is like 200 ideas a year, 200 to 300 ideas a year. And then we go through them and we keep thinking through and then evaluating them. And if for some of the EIRs, if they resonate, if they're like, wow, like this is something that really connects at an emotional level, that is something I want to dedicate the next 5, 10 years of my life to, then we pull the trigger after we also validate that the probability of success is not zero, or actually as high as can be. We think probably it is higher than it really is, and we pull the trigger. So I love that process,
It's great.
and all of us participate, which is really really fun.
Look, that is such a great process because ideas are designed to be attacked. We should all have ideas. We should put them up on the board and we should challenge them. We should find the flaw. People too often, especially outside of a business context, don't view them as ideas, they view them as beliefs. And it's not the belief that's being attacked, it's me as an
Mm.
individual. No, 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 I'm not attacking you. I want to just iterate and find the flaw in that idea because no idea is perfect. Every business plan is a living, breathing document that has to iterate. And if we all took that approach, not just in our entrepreneurial ventures, but in a lot of other parts of our life, I would argue we'd be in a little bit better place as a society.
Totally. I mean, I apply the exact same principles to my personal life than I do to my professional life, both in terms of iterating, A/B testing, figuring out how it works, and like throwing a lot of like spaghetti in the wall to see what sticks. And most people, I think, go down a path and actually don't question that path until perhaps it's too late.
Sure.
Um, I opened this by saying one of our thesis here at FJ Labs is that, and one of the things we'd like to invest in is creating companies that basically allow people to do the job they love, and we do everything else for them. And this is something that we do over and over again, where especially in the B2B world, where we create these companies that help SMB owners manage their companies, and we do most of the management for them, so they can do the core job. What do you think of that thesis? That in the future, you will only do the job you love. Kind of everything else will be done for you, either by a company or it'll be outsourced or whatever.
So I think it plays very well into a lot of very powerful trends that are going on in the world of work, right? And it goes back to this core thesis from the history of work, which is repetitive high volume tasks get automated. And they get automated and allows us to focus on the more core tasks that involve more empathy, more creativity, more design, more human interaction. And so there is a vision of the world of work called the Rosie Jetson scenario. And for your younger listeners, Rosie Jetson was a robot for a futuristic family called the Jetsons. It's funny, I take it for granted that people know who Rosie Jetson is. They do not know who Rosie Jetson is. And Rosie Jetson took all the things off the family's plate, right? They didn't need to worry about anything, the cooking, the cleaning, a lot of things that happened that are those repetitive tasks that are mundane tasks. And it allows people in this Rosie Jetson scenario that gets envisioned to focus on leisure and love and writing and all the things that make our souls sing. And that's a little mushy, but that's the Rosie Jetson scenario. I don't believe the Rosie Jetson scenario is realistic over the next 20 years. And that's just the state of robotics and a host of other things as they come for a consumer standpoint. But it is a lovely vision for the future of humanity that all the mundane tasks, things we don't want to do, are done for us in an outsourced way, in an automated way, by software, by robotics. Great. That's a wonderful place for society to be, depending on what society does with it.
Have you
And hopefully we do wonderful
Uh,
things.
absolutely. Technology is amoral per se. It's humans that can use it for good or for bad. Um,
Right.
the have you looked at like the top labor marketplaces that are emerging, like things like WorkRise, it used to be called RigUp, which is now like billions in GMV, or Trusted Health in the labor in the nursing world. What do you think of these companies? And is that also another trend of
I think they're great.
verticalization, or
There's a lot of great vertical marketplaces out there. I will tell you candidly, one of the things that we did wrong at Work Market. Look, we had a great outcome. I have no complaints. Our investors are happy. ADP is very happy with the product. But when you look at how the world of work is evolving, we are a tool set across all industries. Any company in the world can utilize Work Market if they are utilizing freelancers.
yep,
But we're not great at each individual vertical. We're really good as a toolkit across all verticals, but we could potentially, and it hasn't happened yet, but lose out as people are focused on those verticals because in order to really be an expert in that vertical, you need
yeah,
to provide the training to that workforce and help build up supply. You have to have specific profiling structures, a host of specific search facets, a lot of specific management. How you engage a worker in oil and gas is very different than how you engage a
yep.
nurse. And building the tools specific for that industry has proven thus far, and the story is not fully written. None of these companies have exited. There have been very few exits in the on-demand world yet. Obviously, Upwork going public, our sale, and a few others. But there is a history in which those companies do very, very well, and the completely verticalized tool sets don't do great.
I
I'm not
suspect
fully
both do
prepared to say
well,
which is
right?
which.
Historically, if you looked around the world, the horizontals, and that's true across all categories, the Craigslist's, eBay's, et cetera, of the world, and I think Upwork will be true. They have lower customer acquisition costs because people just go there by default. And so if there are a lot of categories you can verticalize. To verticalize a category, it needs a specific need on either the supply or the demand side, and you need the economics to work. So the job size need to be big enough, and there needs to be enough recurrence. And there are many, in the case of WorkRise, the welder for a week is like 20K. You can make the economics work, but there are a lot of jobs where, frankly, you, they probably belong in Upwork because there's no, even though they would benefit from a better user experience, where you can verticalize it. Maybe it's just too small a job size. So I think both will probably continue to do well.
There's a split between kind of the marketplaces and the
That's true too.
platforms, right? And the platforms can be verticalized and, or horizontal, I should say. And the marketplaces tend to verticalize at a point. There's a great marketplace called
Yeah,
Cluster, which is focused on the aerospace space, which is killing
yeah,
it. I mean, they happen to be brilliantly led by Kim Taylor, but they're just killing it, much like the verticalization in nurses and things like
yeah.
that. An important point, by the way, that people don't appreciate about marketplaces is they tend to kind of work where there's a supply and demand imbalance somewhere. right? Like you have to be addressing that fundamental issue. We'd always struggle with this at Work Market. They would say, customers would come in and they would say, well, I really need plumbers in Cleveland. I'm like, yeah, okay, we can't magically make more plumbers in Cleveland. There's a huge shortage of plumbers and electricians and a lot of other trade jobs in the United States of America. Some marketplace isn't going to magically solve them unless they're very specifically verticalized and they can provide training to take somebody from this level up to the level which they can be engaged and therefore help that supply and demand
One
imbalance.
of the new trends we're seeing in our labor marketplaces is back in the day, you go to Upwork, you say, "Hey, I need this," and then hundreds of people apply, and then you have to go and filter through them. And the new trend we're
Right.
seeing is the marketplace picks the worker for you. And originally, people thought, "Oh, you can do that for Uber because they're interchangeable, the drivers." But we're seeing that this is happening in every category. It's happening for translators, transcribers, computer programmers. I mean, these are like high skilled jobs that are very specific, marketing jobs, SEO jobs, etc. And so they all of a sudden they're managed marketplaces. They're so where the marketplace says, base we have more pattern recognition. We know who the right person is for you. Do you think that's going to continue and that can be done for all jobs?
I think that there are certain jobs where the data allows the separation from signal to noise, and there are many more jobs that a staffing layer or a services layer becomes very important. So we've seen a lot of these different models, right? In the VMS world, which is not something a lot of people understand. The vendor management systems, the biggest company there is called Fieldglass. It was bought by SAP for $1.4 billion, I don't know, 7 years ago. A company called IQ Navigator Beeline. These companies manage hundreds of billions in spend, right? Upwork's amazing, but it's, a couple billion in spend. Work Market does $1 billion in
Yeah.
spend. Like it's a lot, but it's not hundreds of billions. And that industry has evolved where there is a service layer called MSPs. All the big staffing firms have MSPs that help you to manage that software to get all of the temps you need. Could data do it? Maybe over time. But the way that industry has evolved, which is dwarfs the size of everything else we've been talking about, is with that service layer on
I
top of
see.
it, because there's not enough data yet to separate signal from noise to know these are the right 1,000 temps for Walmart in their distribution center in Arkansas.
Have you been keeping an eye on the creator economy? Because in a way, it falls in the future of work as well, right? Like if you're a Twitch caster or a streamer, that's your job, right? Like if you're in Cameo, that's your job. So I don't know if you've put a lot of thought in terms of like the creator consumer divide and the future of the creator economy.
The short answer is I have not studied
Right.
it as well as I've studied other things. Am I aware of it? Of course. To me, I think you're seeing, as you see within a lot of services industries or even in entertainment, there are a lot of people that want to do it, and there are only very, very few that can actually make a living on it.
Yeah.
Somebody told me the other day, if you added up every single person that's ever played professional baseball, it's like 30,000 people over the course of the history of the game. That doesn't even fill a stadium. Doesn't even fill a stadium. And that's it. That is the total number of people that have played this game for 100 years professionally. That's crazy, right? But that is the data. And so
Oh yeah.
somebody that wants to
Definitely
go
tell your
down that
kids not to
road,
become
I would just
professional
say,
athletes. The odds are not in their favor.
and they're not in their favor. And yet people go down that road. And I understand why they do it. It's the allure of it and all these other things. I think there's a danger to the kind of celebrity worship that we do in a number of things because it's not statistically driven. Everybody can't be that person by definition. They're that person because they have some exceptional talent or take on things or skill or luck. But once the slots are taken, it's something I'm concerned about, but I wouldn't pretend to understand enough about yet.
Is there do you think you can use the data and the perspective you have to think through what the work looks like not in 2040, so not 20 years down the line, but maybe 50 years down the line or 100 years down the line? Do you have any general predictions in these types of timeframes?
That is a great question. I will tell you, I've not really thought about that. I've never been asked that. So well done.
I can't take
Um,
credit, so it's Charles, one of our viewers.
okay. I will tell you this. It is really, really difficult to make long-term predictions in the world of work. It's difficult to make long-term predictions in anything, quite frankly. But I hope I've expressed enough that these things are incredibly complex. There are a lot of variables in this equation. And so making predictions even 20 years out is super difficult. But that said, I'm not going to skirt the question. I will say our uninterrupted trends, almost uninterrupted, I should say, over the last 200 years, I don't see any reason to think that those are going to change drastically. We will have more jobs in the world. It will rise to meet the population growth and economic growth around the world. We will work fewer hours. You look back in history, people used to work, Paris, to your point, as farmers and people providing for themselves, about 3,500 hours a year. And that slowly moved about 3,000 hours during the first industrial revolution, down to what we think of as the standard work hour now, which is 2,000 hours, but actually it's 1,780 in the United States. It's about 1,500 in Germany and France. And we will continue to move that down, and we will have a higher standard of living. Jobs, fewer hours, and higher standard of living. That I'm completely comfortable predicting 50 and 100 years out. And those are very good things for society as a whole. But last point on that, you always have to be mindful of those that are going to be left behind, because that period of economic and social dislocation, that second phase of industrial revolutions we talked about before, if done poorly, and if we don't look out for those workers, historically, those are times of revolution. Those are times of tremendous economic and social dislocation. So we need to be
So
mindful.
what should we do? And are there countries that do this well?
There are certainly different models. We have a very Anglo-Saxon model of capitalism here that is very different than the Rhineland model of capitalism in Germany, which is much more stakeholder driven, right? And there are changes going on right now in the United States. We had the Business Roundtable of the 200 CEOs of the 200 largest companies in America a year and a half ago declare we're going to be more focused on stakeholder capitalism. Okay. We have a revolution underway from a D&I standpoint in terms of a more diverse points of view on boards of directors and in management suites. Those are all wonderful things. But where it plays out, there's a balance and there are trade-offs, as with all things. We can have a less red in the claw and tooth form of capitalism, but would we get the kind of innovations that we have enjoyed? Would we have an mRNA? Would messenger RNA as a delivery mechanism been developed for all these vaccines that have now, again, hopefully returned us to normalcy here in the United States, at least? Would that have been developed if Moderna did not have the profit motive? And by the way, get a huge grant from DARPA to do this? I don't know. Is that a better society, a worse society? I wouldn't pretend to have the answers, but if you want to have the conversation of a different form of capitalism, be aware of its trade-offs and what you get.
Cool. Anything else we didn't cover that we should cover or talk about?
Oh, I mean, nothing that comes to mind for me, but I'm always happy to debate and discuss things as long as we use data and evidence and we can discuss and debate each other's ideas. I will debate and discuss anything
I
with
take it
anybody.
you're a fan of C. Thinker.
I am.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that's it for the show. Thank you for joining us, Jeff, and thank you everyone for watching.
Thank you.